This is Linda Eastburn. I want to thank you for joining my channel today and remind you to please subscribe to the channel. It helps us immensely to move forward. My guest today is Laura. How do you say your last name again?
Vosika.
Vosika. I want to make sure I get it right. Vosika. Laura is here today with some unusual phenomena that's happened to her, and I haven't even heard the story yet. So I'm really anxious to hear what all she has to talk about today. So, Laura, just jump right in and tell me what is it that you want to talk about?
Well, we this isn't the main story. We did have a very interesting house we lived in northern Minnesota where things appeared and disappeared, and we swear it was the previous owner playing tricks on us. He seemed to have been someone with a great sense of fun, and literally things would appear. A votive candle appeared on our mantle 8 months after we moved in, and nobody was in the house. Nobody would have put it there. A missing tile appeared. There was kind of a border in the shower, and one little tiny piece had always been missing. And one day it just turned up on my dresser out of the blue. And we'd been there a year and a half at that point. So that's just an interesting, fun story. But the main story that I had mentioned to you, and that I would love to know if anybody else has experienced this, is about 4 years ago. I think it was, we went down to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for my son's graduation from advanced training at the Army camp there, the Army base. And I went with my stepdaughter over. We had gone in the RV, so we were at the RV park by Ruby Doo Creek. And my stepdaughter and I went over to the other side of the road into this beautiful park that's there. And it's kind of a lightly wooded area beyond the park, and it takes you to Ruby Doo Springs, which is a really amazing place where people go diving and they go into the underwater caverns. So this place was beautiful. There were families, there are kids playing in the water at this pool, dogs, and it was just such a happy, beautiful atmosphere. And so my husband had been driving the RV, so he was taking a nap. But when he woke up, I said, this is just such a beautiful place. I have to take you there. Well, up in the north, evening falls slowly. It takes its time. So we went in broad daylight, and we were sitting by the creek, and all of a sudden I realized night came very quickly, and it was beyond dusk. It was really getting dark very quickly. And all of a sudden I heard a footstep, maybe about 50 feet behind us. I'm not good with distances, but I'm guessing about 50 feet, maybe 100. And it was something big and heavy. It was like the footstep of a large man, or I thought maybe it was even, I don't think they're moose there, but something along that size. And I looked back and I didn't see anything, but I just got this very strong sense we need to go. And so I told my husband, there's something out there, there's someone behind us, and we need to go. And we stood up, we started to leave, and he looked back and he said what he saw. I didn't see it, but he described what he saw as a man-shaped bowling pin, so sort of a head and then shoulders, not as distinct as a man, but big, like a man. And he said it was just an inky black that just felt very malevolent. And we started moving very quickly. Now, to get back out to the road, you had to go around this boardwalk around the top of the pond and then head out. And so we got to the other side of that boardwalk on the other side of the pool, and he looked back again and he said he swore it was coming toward us. Now, my husband, put this in perspective, is an avid outdoorsman. He was an Eagle Scout. He's quite comfortable being in the woods. He used to walk our property in Duluth in the middle of the night with no flashlight, just for fun. So he's not somebody who's easily scared or takes flights of fancy, but he swore it was coming close to us and he was almost running, pulling me out of there. And that's the end of that story. And I've been looking ever since then, trying to find anybody who could explain this. I've never heard of this kind of encounter before, but it seems to me that we can't be the only ones who have experienced whatever that entity was.
Do you know if there are any other reports in that area of any kind of unusual phenomena or anyone seeing a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot there?
Um, I don't know about Sasquatch or Bigfoot in particular. I have gone online. I think this was about 4 years ago it happened. I've gone online and tried to find any reports of this particular creature, maybe 4 or 5 times over the years, and I can never find any. Now, I do think that in Missouri, there are definitely cases of Bigfoot. I spoke to a professor, and I wish I had remembered to go back in my emails and get her name, who has written a book about phenomenon in Missouri. I believe she's a professor there somewhere. And I talked to her about it, and she said that it could be something, I believe they're called guardians. And she said in very ancient times, people would do these rituals, particularly around caves and springs, I think she said, that would summon what they considered guardians of the land. And that was her best bet, but she had never heard of anything like this either.
Yeah, Missouri's pretty rich with sightings, Bigfoot sightings, even though they're still far and few between.
Mhm.
That particular area, now exactly where was this in Missouri?
It, I believe the town is called Waynesville. It's right by Fort Leonard Wood, if you know
Yeah,
where that is.
yeah, I'm familiar
Okay.
with that area. I don't know of any reports, but I can look up from my resources and see what I can find as far as reports in that area go. It's not that uncommon, especially if you get back into a nature setting here, especially near water, uh,
Hmm.
or for people to have sometimes to have some type of a Bigfoot sighting. I've interviewed a lot of people from Missouri that have had sightings. Also, we did a film called Byways of Bigfoot, which was a waterway. It was not a waterway that was near where you were, though. But there are rivers in that vicinity, right?
Yes, this is called Ruby Dew Creek. And when this first happened to us, we went back and did some research on the area. I'm pretty sure the town is called Waynesville, and I think they have signs up, but either way, our research showed the Trail of Tears did go right through there. And so we thought, we don't know for a fact, but it seemed like it would make sense that they would have camped right at that pool. It's a great source of water. They had a long way to go. And so that was another thing we wondered, was it possibly related to events that happened there that would be likely to leave some kind of an impression on the land and in the atmosphere?
Have you ever gone back, or did you go back the next day in daylight and look for any signs of any sort?
No. And I wish I had thought to do that. Like I said, it was my son's graduation. So it was a pretty busy day the next day with all the events. And I think then we left right after that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I can understand you were not there to see a or explore, research this particular creature, but
Right,
had
right.
nonetheless it kind of appeared. Was there any odor in the air or any kind of unusual sounds that you heard?
The only sound was the very distinct sound of the footfall. I didn't notice any odors, and my husband has never mentioned hearing anything either.
Sometimes there are these very strange sounds around Bigfoot that people cannot explain. Oftentimes, in extremely remote areas where there should be no mechanical sounds at all, there may be sounds of drills running
Oh,
or
interesting.
metallic sounds where it just should not be there. Oftentimes, a cowbell might ring, chimes, all
Oh,
kinds of
that's
strange
wild.
sounds. Yeah.
I've heard about wood knocks a lot. Now, this is funny. The only reason I know very much about Bigfoot is because when we still lived in northern Minnesota, we tossed a Christmas tree off our deck, which was only a foot or so off the ground. It got covered with snow, which lasted until mid-April, if you're familiar with northern Duluth or northern Minnesota. And right about the time the snow melted, we dragged the tree over closer to the pond that was maybe 100 yards from our house. And the next day it had totally disappeared. Now, we backed up to thousands of acres of state forest. And so we thought nobody came down a quarter mile long driveway to steal a Christmas tree. Nobody came through the state forest this far onto our land, which was another 20 acres, to steal our Christmas tree. And it was such a mystery. I actually started to take Bigfoot seriously and go, that's the only thing big enough to steal a Christmas tree that would. A bear's not going to take it. So I ended up doing a lot of research on Bigfoot, which I never thought I would do. And I learned some really interesting things. But the funny upshot is it turned out the pond was deep enough and the wind was strong enough that it was in the pond, totally hidden. So that's how I know what I know about Bigfoot.
So you think the wind took it into the pond?
At this point, I'm pretty sure, but it took us so long to find it. It was probably 6 weeks later that we finally found it. And we did not think our pond was that deep at all because we'd been waiting in it to do cleaning and things. But it would have been a better story if Bigfoot had taken it, that's for sure.
But still, that this is how sometimes, stories can get so confused, the reality that it
Right.
is. So I'm glad you found it and we're able to actually identify
Well,
what the source was.
right. It part of the reason I started to think that was because, as I said, my husband likes to walk out in the woods at any time of day or night. And at one point, he did find a massive, huge paw print. And at another time, he found sort of, I guess you would call it a nest in the snow that seemed too large for a deer. And so there were these other things surrounding it. There was, in my research, I found that they will build nests sometimes. And there was a tree with this very odd deformity that I had noticed. And so I thought, I wonder if that's what that is. And when I went back, I was like, that wouldn't even be a nest big enough for a Bigfoot preemie. So, but it was funny that there were these other things surrounding the loss of the Christmas tree that made me start to think, I wonder if that's what we're dealing with.
Well, the nest that your husband found in the snow, that's not the same thing that you're talking about, right? It was a different type of nest.
Yeah, it was like a burrow, like something had bedded down and left this big indent in the snow, but it was too big to be a deer, he said.
Hmm. Yeah. But no footprints or any kind of prints otherwise around it.
I don't know where the footprint was. He had seen a very large footprint off the path that he couldn't explain. And I'm going to go back to he was an Eagle Scout. He knows things like this. If I couldn't explain it, that wouldn't mean much. But it was a very large print. And as far as I remember, it was just one. So,
And this was the same property where you had the items that were appearing.
yes, yes.
Do you know anything about the history of that property?
Not the early history. It was owned, it was a really neat property. It had originally been a small house. And the previous owner, who died, possibly died in the house, had been a restaurateur up in Duluth and very successful. And so they built this massive addition on that I think was maybe 15 years old when we bought the house. And who owned it before that, if anybody, I don't know. But they had 29 acres. They built ATV trails all over this property and they filled it with creatures. So you might find shiny metal octopus in the trees. There was one of those sectional crocodiles stretched out on a log. There were, what do you call those? The green man faces on some of the trees. There were unicorns, monkeys hanging from the trees. So they were people who really had a lot of fun with life and just this spirit of joy, even though he had all these health problems that did eventually take his life at a relatively young age. And that's the only history I know of it.
Do you know if he passed at the property or not?
I don't. And I don't. I know that he was in and out of the hospital a lot, and he needed an organ transplant, actually, his second organ transplant, and he didn't survive that. So I don't know if he died on the property or in the hospital, but we always said, this man had such a sense of fun. I think he was having fun with us, and just there was such a happy spirit about the house.
Do you remember anything else that seemed out of place? Any sudden odors that came about? Any sounds that you heard while you were living there? Anything like that?
No, that house never had any of that.
Just the two items that appeared.
Well, there were a few more things than that. Let me see. I'm trying to remember when we first moved in. I don't think the movers had even brought our things yet. We had a bottle of Irish cream, one of those big jugs of Irish cream, and we had a box of wine, and they both disappeared. And this was an empty house. Like where could that be misplaced when literally there was nothing in the house at that point? And let's see, a pair of readers appeared. So I think the things that appeared were the tile, the candle, and a pair of readers that happened to be perfect for my eyes. And that time there had been people in and out of the house. We'd had some guests, but I asked all of them. Oh, actually, you know what? A couple other things disappeared. I keep saying they disappeared in the move, but they disappeared probably 8 weeks before we moved. I know exactly where they were, and then they were just gone. We've been in our new house for 2 years now, and they've never turned up. So maybe that's Brian too. I don't know.
Could be. And no one else had access to the house to take the wine and the Irish cream or anything.
No, no, we were the only ones in there, the two of us and our dog in a 7,000 square foot house with no furniture, with nothing. And they disappeared. To this day, we don't know what happened to them.
Interesting. Have you ever lived anywhere else where unusual phenomena like that occurred?
Oh my, I've lived in a lot of places. I don't think that I've lived in a house where anything like that has happened, but I did look at a house in a tiny little town, population 200, called Greenwald, Minnesota. That was a very interesting property, probably at least 100 years old at the time. It had been a general store, it had been various other things. So originally it was the general store with the owner's space above where they lived. And so there were a bunch of bedrooms up there. Then they had built an addition on. There was a full basement, unfinished, just the cement sort of style you would have found in that age of house. And I really wanted this so badly because I think 7 of my kids were still at home at the time with me. It was this massive, huge house with enough bedrooms for us. The kitchen was perfectly, beautifully remodeled. It was just beautiful. And my son did tell me, you are not allowed to move to a town so small that our family single-handedly raises the percentage of the population. But he got his wish because I went up and looked at it once, and you could just open the lockbox that the realtor gave you the code and go in by yourself. I was so excited. This house was only $50,000. I went back with my daughter and a few of my boys to look at it a second time. And they were so excited. They were running all over this house. And after about 30 minutes, my daughter and I were upstairs, and I started to get very uncomfortable up there. I just got the strongest sense, almost as if you could hear, I'm going to say them saying, it's time to leave now. We're through with you. And I just got very uncomfortable. And in one bedroom up there, especially, that was all done in red carpet and red on the walls and things. And I didn't want to leave my daughter. So we got back to the car. I called the boys, and this feeling was just growing. And I said to my daughter, so what did you think? You know, do you like it? I was really trying not to lead her in any way. And she immediately said, there's something in that red bedroom upstairs. No. And I thought it was striking that we both felt the very same thing and very specifically in the same bedroom. And so I did end up not buying that house.
What was that feeling like? How would you describe it?
It was very uncomfortable. It was, I think the best I could explain it is when you walk into a house where people have just been arguing and furious with each other, and they immediately put on the polite smile, pretending everything's okay, but you can just feel it thick in the air. It was that kind of a feeling. And like I said, it was almost as if I was hearing the voices saying, it's time for you to go now. It was very much a feeling of, we've put up with you long enough, move along. We'd like to be left alone.
How does that feeling compare to when you were at Ruby Dew Creek and you heard these footsteps happening and you felt like you needed to leave, you needed to go? How would you compare those two feelings?
Um, the one at Ruby Dew Creek was definitely a feeling of malevolence, of actual danger. And my husband said the same thing, especially when he looked back and he was sure that it had moved closer to us or, you know, was coming after us. That was a very disturbing feeling as opposed to the one in the house was more unpleasant, simply a feeling of you're not wanted. But it didn't feel like malevolence exactly or danger. It didn't feel like anything good, but not to the point of malevolence, if that makes sense.
When the unusual phenomena happened at the house where the things would suddenly appear, that didn't have any kind of a negative feeling, or did it?
No, no, and that's what was so striking that it that felt benevolent. It felt like if it was the owner, it felt like he just loved that house. It felt like a place where there had been so much joy. In fact, we tended to run into a lot of people who had association with that. Our financial advisor lived in Minneapolis. And at some point, when my husband mentioned where we lived, he was like, oh my gosh, I was seeing their daughter for 5 years back in, I guess, high school and college. And we went to a murder mystery dinner one night, and we ended up sitting at a table with two other couples. Three of these four people all had association and friendships with this family in one way or another. And this was a family that just, they did so much charitable work. They did so much for other people. Everybody had such happy, positive stories. And I felt like if it was the previous owner, that he just wanted to spend his afterlife making people happy like he did in life. And it felt pleasant, it felt benevolent.
Yeah, it's something very different. So you've described three very different sensations, even though all three of these incidences were kind of mysteries.
Yes.
But mostly it was from a sound in one case, objects appearing in another, and then yet another was just this sensation, just this feeling that you had.
Yes. And one that was very much shared by both me and my daughter.
Well, in your research of Bigfoot, let's kind of go down that avenue for a little while. In your research of Bigfoot, did you conclude anything about what type of being this might be?
what type of being Bigfoot is, or what type of being we encountered in Ruby Doo Creek.
If this was indeed a Bigfoot that you encountered in Ruby Doo Creek, do you think that Bigfoot was an actual flesh and blood being, or do you think it was something different than that?
What we encountered, I do not believe was flesh and blood. Now, I guess I would want to ask my husband again. There could be an outside chance that it was an actual physical thing, but he didn't feel like that. And again, I didn't see it, but he described it as just having this inky blackness, almost like a black void that would just suck you in if you let it, that he felt such malevolence from it that it wanted to destroy people in whatever way it could. No, I don't think it was flesh and blood.
Do you think it had the outline of a Bigfoot, however, or do you think it was an outline of something completely different than Bigfoot?
Well, again, he described it as almost like a man-sized bowling pin. It could have been bigger than a man from what he said. And, in the dark, you can imagine the head and something like the shoulders. Maybe because it was dark, he just couldn't see the full outline of the head and then the shoulders. So, yeah, there's an outside chance it could have been more like a man's shape.
Mhm. Yeah, that's unusual. I don't think I've heard that particular type of description. Now, lots of people have sightings of something and it takes on, some very shadowy type of form.
Hmm.
It's not, usually that's because of the lighting. They just can't see, and
Right.
it's kind of hidden behind other various things as well. So it's hard to always say. Um,
Now, I'll ask you. You talk about Bigfoot on your program. Do they tend to be mean-spirited or malevolent or unkind?
it takes different forms. Different people respond different ways to them. Oftentimes, if they're being protective of young, they
Hmm.
very ferociously trying to get you out of the area. That's just a normal response, I think. Most of the time, it is just a sighting, and there is no real deep interaction that is frightening or anything other than just the shock
Hmm.
of seeing this creature that they are not expecting to see, don't believe necessarily even exists. So they have that
Right.
response.
In
Mhm.
in all the research I've done, I've always gotten the impression that most of these encounters, they just want to be left alone and just don't want to interact with people and will usually just go away.
Yeah, oftentimes that it is that. Now, sometimes if you're in their territory and they don't want you there, there will just be the sounds, the intimidating sounds will
Mhm.
often happen. And they may not even see them, but they just hear these sounds. And then there are the campers when you mentioned the wood knocks. There are the campers that go out and they'll hear a wood knock in one place, and if they make a sound in response to that, they might hear other sounds, whether wood knocks, but usually at a distance. But oftentimes it completely surrounds them. It's not one,
Mhm.
it's many, and maybe at a distance. Sometimes they can hear them coming closer to them. Most of
Mhm.
the time, in those cases, they do not approach them. They don't actually ever see them. They can just, it's the sound getting closer or louder that they can determine that there is some movement on their part,
Mhm.
getting coming in closer. Sounds sometimes can take various forms, the howling, the screaming, and just sometimes so loud that the earth shakes. I mean, it just
Wow.
literally vibrates, that it can be
Mhm.
so intensely loud. What that is, sometimes we don't know. If you don't actually see what's creating that sound, it's difficult to say.
Right.
Really didn't hear any sound, you just heard the footsteps.
That's all I heard. And I think it was just a single footstep, which in retrospect sounds odd to me. It wasn't like a thump, but it was a very clear footstep of something large. And
Yes.
then it just stopped.
Hmm.
And when I looked back over my shoulder, I didn't see anything. It was only after we got up and started moving that my husband looked back and saw it.
How long did it follow you? How long did you hear those steps?
Um, I don't I didn't hear the footsteps coming after us. I only heard the very first one that alerted me to it. And if it followed us, it can't have been more than a minute. I think it just wanted us gone, or alternatively, I think it wasn't going to leave the woods. Let's put it that way. I think my explanation would be I would assume it was sort of tied to that spot in some sense that it couldn't or wouldn't leave the woods. So once we passed the pond and got more into the park area, I'm positive it didn't go that far.
Being a park area, how populated or used, I guess, is this park area where this thing was?
It seemed to me that during the day it wasn't crowded. But like I said, there were a few families there with kids, with dogs, and it seemed like the kind of place, this is a very small town, Wayneville, whatever it's called. It's a very small town. And I would assume a lot of people come through for Fort Leonard Wood because the campground is there and so on. I think it's a place that is very routinely used by families during the day. Whether people go there at night, I don't know. I wouldn't think a lot would go there during the night.
Did you sleep comfortably that night, or was this something that was disturbing enough to bother you for a while?
That's a good question. I don't recall having trouble sleeping. I definitely did not want to go back there. Um, I'll have to look back in my journals and see, but I don't recall worrying about it crossing the road and coming after us. I think there was some thought of that, but I don't remember being awake all night. And of course, we'd had a very long day too. It was like a 17-hour drive or something like that to Fort Leonard Wood.
Did you ever think to ask any other people in the area if anyone else had seen anything back there?
I didn't. And again, we were preoccupied with my son's graduation and all the events going on at Fort Leonard Wood. But that's why I go online now and again and try to find, and I might, that's a good idea to see if I can find some local people. I don't believe that we're the only ones who have experienced that.
Exactly. Oftentimes, if there's an area that has, whether it be Bigfoot or whether it be something else that's there, oftentimes more than one person may have experienced it.
Mhm.
Have you ever experienced any kind of UFO activity or orbs or lights or anything unusual like that?
No. And after a few people who I've interviewed on my podcast, I have interviewed, I think her last name is Massey, Donna Massey, who wrote a novel about UFO abductions. And then Stephanie Sanders Jacob also wrote a fantastic book about that. And that's a fascinating question to me. And I hope never to have those experiences.
Well, I was a UFO researcher for a lot of years, long before I became acquainted with anything dealing with
Mhm.
Bigfoot. But it was interesting that there was an overlay of very similar types of experiences that people were having
Mhm.
with these two. I guess they're both cryptids. The aliens are cryptids because they are not, distinctively proven. And so is
Mhm.
Bigfoot, but a lot of the mystery around it, but also a lot of the response that people would have after seeing something that they did not believe existed. And then they're encountering this as if this is some kind of a flesh and blood creature that is right in front of them and interacting with them in some way. So the fear and the phenomena itself does have some overlay.
Right. And I think what's telling to me, I do not want to believe in UFOs at all. I don't want to believe in aliens. I kind of think that I don't. And yet it's hard to discount so many stories. And the reason I believe in ghosts is because years ago, I finally just said there are way too many stories. They can't all be lying. These stories exist through history. Now, here's an interesting thing I discovered in researching for my books. I don't know if you know anything about this. I was looking for ghost stories around the Battle of Bannockburn, the remaining battlefield. They don't know exactly where it is. And I discovered that there are no stories like Gettysburg. You'll find lots of people having encounters at Gettysburg of the ghostly nature. You don't find that on these older battlefields in the UK. And one person said there seems to be kind of a time limit for ghosts, if that makes sense, that you don't tend to find stories from more than a few hundred years ago. So I don't know if you've come across that.
That's interesting. No, I have not. But that is something that's worthy of exploring, probably. I've only had one ghost encounter, if you could even call it that. I was in my home, sitting in the living room, with my back to the corner of the room. And my husband was on the sofa. Two friends of ours were, one was on the sofa, the other was sitting in a chair at the other end. And I was just sitting on the floor there. We were all just having a nice conversation, probably about some paranormal stuff, but I'm not sure. And I started feeling that uncomfortable feeling as you were talking about that red room. This was my own
Mhm.
living room, but just this uneasiness behind me. And I'd never felt anything exactly like that before. But it felt so uncomfortable at a point, I decided to get up and sit on the sofa where I didn't have my back to that corner.
Mhm.
A good friend of mine across the way from me, she had taught herself how to see energies, not maybe ghosts, but just energy movement. And she said
Mhm.
she had seen something back there, and there was some energy movement in that corner, but she couldn't identify, of course, what it was. Which I
You
just
know,
blew that off as kind of interesting. But then in a few
yeah.
days, there was a man that came to my home, and he entered the house, and we were there to do a hypnotic session. I was working as a hypnotherapist at that time. And normally I went into that living room just to do a pre-interview before, just get comfortable with one another before doing this.
Mhm.
He came in, and I motioned for him to sit down in that same living room, and he didn't. He didn't say anything. He walked straight through my family room, looked outside, came back to the hall area, looked at the room again, put his hands across his chest, and said, "I think my father used to live here." And
Oh, really?
he looked at that very corner that I'd had my back to and felt the uncomfortable sensation and said, and he died in a chair right there in that corner.
Oh my.
And so that was kind of a kind of proof, sort of, that maybe
Mhm.
there was some residue energy left
Right.
from his.
Here's a part of the story that you just reminded me of.
Mhm.
My son, one of my sons, because I have seven, went to St. Mary's College in Winona, Minnesota, and it's reputed to be one of the most haunted colleges in America, although I think many colleges claim that. No, this does tie to the house eventually. I'll try and get there quickly. Uh, the first night he was there, his freshman year, very first night, he was alone in his dorm room. And all of a sudden, he got the most horrible sensation of something by the window to the point, and I don't think he's fanciful. I don't think he has wild imagination or is prone to fear. He's a wrestler, he's an athlete, he's not afraid of things. But he just got this horrible fear, and he immediately went to the opposite side of the room and started praying. Okay, the feeling went away, and he felt okay again. The next morning, he got a knock on the door. Remember, this is only his second day at college. And Alex, who would become his friend, was there. And he said, "Okay, you don't know me from Adam. This is going to sound weird, but last night I saw something huge and black outside your window. And all of a sudden, it just ran and fled." And they compared times. And exactly when Alex saw this, was when Matthew sensed it and started praying. And Alex went on to say that he has been able to see things since he was quite young. And so this was like a shadow person that was by Matthew's window. And what this has to do with the house was when Alex came to visit us, because we knew that he kind of sees things and sees auras and things. We asked him, "What do you sense about this house?" And he did not feel benevolence. He felt that this was a house that had a lot of sadness in it and something less than, much darker than what I felt. So that's always perplexed me that he got a completely different feel, because I do get feelings for houses, not the way Alex does. But when I've been in a few houses, over the years as we've looked at real estate, where I say there's just something very uncomfortable here. But Alex was feeling something darker in that house where I felt only benevolence in that house. And I can't explain that, except for the fact that the owner was sick so often. Maybe he picked up on that, where I picked up on the rest of the story.
That's true. And as as we experience life, of course, there's a roller coaster of emotions that we all feel.
Right.
And there are sad moments, of course, and despairing moments, and there are, happy moments and wonderful moments. So it could just be whatever vibration each of you are aligning with, to pick up. And both may exist in the house simultaneously.
Yeah. Well, I can only compare this to one other house. We lived when I was growing up in a house in Duluth that again was probably built in the 19 teens, 1920s. And everybody loved that house. Previous owners would come back and introduce themselves to whoever the current owner was. And they all had these wonderful stories about how much they loved this house. And so when we put the house on the market in 1983, when my parents did, they hadn't yet made the decision if my dad was going to retire and we were going to stay another year, or if he was going to stay in and we'd move. And my parents figured it didn't matter, because houses routinely took 3 to 5 years to sell in Duluth at that time. Ours sold in 3 days. And it was because of that feeling in the house that people walked in and they just loved that house. They wanted that house. They wanted to be in it. So I find it very interesting, all these different atmospheres and feelings that you get in different places.
That's true. Of course, I've done real estate for many, many years, been in so many houses. I think I've only owned one house that was known to be a haunted property, however, and it was one that was quite sad. And a lot of poltergeist type of activity did occur in that house over the years. But a woman had committed suicide in the attic of the home, and I think it had just left a lot of chaotic kind of energy that continued to be there and was present in that particular house. Now, when we bought it, there was a young family living there with children, and the only area that was having some issues were the children's toys. Oftentimes, the toys would start moving on their own. They had a little fire
Yeah,
engine, and the ladder would go up and down and up and down and up and down by itself.
it's wild.
There were a few other things that happened in the kitchen area, where the, electrical things would stop and start, lights go off and on, that
Mhm.
sort of thing. But it was known that this was the haunted house in the community. So it I think it really did have some energies there.
It's funny. All of this stuff seems to center in Duluth for me. I kind of used to joke that we had a graveyard at one end of our street and a haunted house at the other. And we know about this because my sister was born, her birthday's in 2 days. She was born when we first moved there, and my mother happened to be in the recovery room with somebody who lived at the end of our block in this haunted house. And this house had once been the carriage house for the house that's still next door to it. And in the 1920s, there was, I guess, a stable man. The word's slipping my mind. He worked with the horses, and he went crazy, started shooting people from this carriage house, and the police came and shot him. And so this new friend of my mom's, because they had babies together, was telling my mom about the things that happen in there, which included the kind of stereotypical red stain that won't come out of the floor ever. She talked about how one day she was you had to go up these outside stairs to a door sort of halfway in the middle, and then you could go upstairs or downstairs. And so she heard very clear, distinct footsteps coming up those stairs. And they had a dog that was a hunting dog, so very sensitive. And it just stood at the top of the stairs, staring straight at the stairs. And she went to see, oh my gosh, who's in my house coming up? No one was there, of course. And so another day she was down in the laundry room in the basement where this shooting would have occurred when she got, again, that just very disturbing sense that she was being watched to the point she ran, fled upstairs and started praying. And she said after she prayed, nothing ever happened in that house again.
That's interesting. I've heard of that before, that you can kind of ward them away or remove them from your presence through various processes like prayer or just something that that distinguishes the energies that you're
Yeah.
sensing,
Hmm.
that moves them out of your presence. And so that's very common. And she never had that experience again.
Right. And these things, I mean, this was in 1980. So it all happened before they met in the hospital. And but at that time, that's what she told my mother, was that she never experienced anything again. Whether anything happened in later years, I don't know.
Right, exactly. Well, tell me, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share with us?
I think I have told you all the wild experiences I've had in this sort of paranormal realm. But it is interesting that on Books and Brews, in fact, I just put it up, I think last night, my interview with Sam Ritchie, who worked in real estate in the UK and now in Spain. And this is her field where she walks into houses and she does see or sense things. And so she does what she calls space clearing. And, according to what the people she works with their houses, whatever she's doing works. And it's a very interesting story. If anybody wants to look up Books and Brews and find Sam Ritchie's story about this.
Exactly. And Books and Brews can be found on what platforms?
We are on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Our main website is booksandbrews.net, and we have a YouTube channel. The main site has one set of interviews that go out on all the podcasts. The YouTube channel has all the interviews, which includes Books and Brews Light, where I don't actually make drinks or pick a beer. So, and that is youtube.com/at symbol books and brews spelled out.
And mostly you interview authors, is that right?
I interview entirely authors, yes.
Yeah, it was fun being on your show. I
It
thought you
was
had,
fun having you. I wish I could do cocktails and beers for every single one, but it does get to be expensive and time consuming. So we only do that once a month.
yeah, exactly. Well, it was a great show, and I highly recommend that people watch it. And if people just want to get in touch with you, do you have a contact and way for them to contact you?
Yes, I believe I have a contact form on my website, which is lauravosica.com. And, I'll double check that. But otherwise, gabrielshornpress@gmail.com is my business account, or Books and Brews Live at gmail.com. You can contact me through both of those, or at Facebook, laura.vosica.author. And any of those places you can find me and reach me.
Well, I thank you for sharing all of your bizarre stories with us today. We
Yeah.
always like listening to that. And I would suspect that the sound that you heard in the woods could potentially be some type of phenomena that involved Bigfoot. So I'm just going to put that out there. Okay.
I'm going to keep looking, and I will pursue that avenue, seeing if there could be some connection to it.
Yeah. It just sounds so familiar with so many people
Mhm.
that have sightings with Bigfoot. I want to thank all my audience for watching today and remind you to please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us keep the channel going.